Let me bring in our esteemed panel to cover this in greater detail. Martha MacCallum back with us, anchor of The Story, executive editor of The Story with Martha MacCallum. Her co-debate moderator is joining us as well, Bret Baier, anchor of Special Report, chief political anchor, executive editor, snappy, snazzy dresser always. Andy McCarthy is here as well. He knows something about the legal process. Probably not as much as me with my LA law background and law and order, but he's very close. John Yoo as well. John, of course, the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Martha, I started with you. I'd like to get your take then on what's at stake here, because much has been said of the judge not handling this particular arraignment today, but will be handling this case, this Obama appointee. And Chandra Chutkan doesn't suffer fools gladly, or at least those who precipitated what she called an historic event. And I'm just wondering if she's been tough on those who were involved on the storming of the Capitol on January 6th and meting out sentences that went even beyond what some of the prosecutors were asking. Will she be tough on the guy they were answering to?
Yeah, could be. I think, as Jessica Tarlov pointed out a little while ago, the take was that in Florida, he has a judge who might be more favorable to him because he appointed her. In this case, it might be, the perception at least might be that it could go in a different direction. And when it comes to change of venue issues or the pace of this trial, she's known for having a speedy pace with these other January 6th situations. So she may be cut to the chase kind of judge on this. It's interesting. She's not there today. It was a magistrate who handled this case, but we got a little bit of color from Jake Gibson about what it's like in there. According to him, our producer on the ground for the Department of Justice, he said that the president was stoic when he entered the room. Remember that when he enters the room, he has just come from the processing phase of all of this, the fingerprinting, which it has to be a difficult experience for anybody going through that, no matter how much you may feel that you're sort of fighting for the people, as he has said in his Truth Social post. That can't be that pleasant an experience. That he looked around the room, signed some more papers at the desk. He's about 20 feet from Jack Smith in this room. Obviously, somebody that, he's not going to want to go over and glad hand. And he's, obviously said a lot of things about him. So this is a tense situation. Even though it's the third time that we've watched this, there's no doubt that it's a very tense situation. But it's one that the former president, is clearly trying to leverage as best he can politically.
Bret, you've talked to the president. I think of the first time we were watching all of this with the Alvin Bragg counts that came up in New York. I'm not saying that the former president looked flustered, but you could tell that this was an overwhelming first time in my life experience kind of thing. This is the third time. It might not be the last time. How do you think he is comporting himself? You've had a chance to see him up close in that interview. I know he takes it case by case. I know the bravado and everything associated with it. But how is he dealing with this from what you can see?
Yeah, Neil, good afternoon. First of all, I think this is all surreal. The fact that Griff Jenkins, our correspondent out there, references that other arraignment that he covered with the former president. Right. We're on our third one here, and this is pretty amazing as we talk about this. I think the president, you're right, for all the bravado on Truth Social, all the things he says, I think that those images, and when we had a glimpse in Manhattan of his face, are someone who does take this seriously. He's facing, a lot of time in jail if he was convicted of all these things. He doesn't believe he's going to be. He believes he's going to fight it all. And I think the bravado is real, but at moments he thinks about the seriousness of what he's looking at. That judge is Judge Chutkan. In these cases, she first ruled on the access by the January 6th committee to all of the White House files and all of the background information. And in making that ruling, she said from the bench, the president is not king and he's no longer president. And she's, in a number of these cases about January 6th rioters, made clear her disdain, obviously, for that day, that moment, and what it means for democracy. So in that context, I think she's probably going to hold the reins pretty tight in this courtroom.
So does that mean that, and by that, Andy, from what Bret said, that obviously the Trump folks are going to want to push this back and punt it back as far as they possibly can. She might not abide that. Can she force that issue to say, I know what you want, but here's what I'm going to do? End of story.
I think she has a very hard time doing that here, Neil. And this is because of the tactical move that Smith made, which I think he may end up regretting. And that is, if you really want to get this case to trial quickly, you indict this one first. And instead, what he did was he indicted the Florida case first. And that gives former President Trump the ability to come into Judge Chutkan's court and say, you know, he tactically undermined my due process right to prepare a defense in this trial by choosing not only to indict me in another district, but to persuade the judge in that district to get the case to trial in May. So it's very hard for him, I think, at this point to then say, and we need to get this case to trial very quickly. Now, she may be very open to that argument, but he has made himself a kind of a minefield in terms of doing that. I would just also say about this case, to a point that Bret made before, for what it's worth, when I had indictments where I had co-conspirators or accomplice witnesses, I like to put them in the indictment. I know there's a lot of speculation now about people whose names are not in the indictment. Typically, when you have people who are cooperating with the government, you want that in the indictment. You want to describe it. You want to describe who they are. They help you, in some ways, make the allegations that you put into the indictment. And that goes back to the jury when they're deliberating over the case. So that's the kind of thing that I'd be surprised if he's leaning heavily on people who aren't mentioned in the indictment one way or the other.
You know, John, we learned, and I think Martha was touching on it, and Bret indirectly, that the president is now, the former president is in the room. Jack Smith is in the room. Donald Trump, you know, we're told, kept looking at him, or no, not kept, but was looking at him. And I'm wondering how you can explain this sort of stage setting here. It almost comes across to me like the stare off before a prize fight, you know, where they're staring at each other and looking at each other, weighing the other. I'm not going to do my Mr. T impression. I'll save you that. But I am wondering, John, what to make of that. What do you look for? You know, you're a good lawyer. You're looking back and forth, how people are sort of sizing each other up. The president, obviously, no fan of Jack Smith. It's pretty clear from the remarks and the statements that we've heard out of Jack Smith, neither he of the former president, but play that kind of drama behind the scenes out. It's probably more body language than anything else. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've never told you this, but I actually worked in that courthouse for more than a year. I was a clerk for one of the great D.C. Circuit judges. We're very aware of the historic importance of that courtroom. That is the courtroom where President Truman was stopped from seizing the steel mills. That is the courtroom where President Nixon was ordered to hand over the Watergate tapes case. So it's almost fitting that I think the most important criminal trial in the history of our country is going to take place in the D.C. courthouse. It is on a par with those earlier decisions, those earlier cases that mean so much to the Constitution and our political system. It's actually not a very big courtroom. It looks like a lot of the other ones. It's mahogany, and the judge is way up there on a dais. But as you say, Neil, the prosecution and the defense sit very close to each other. They're probably less than 2 feet apart, and they're going to be looking at each other the whole trial. Actually, one of the interesting questions, despite the historic significance of this, is President Trump going to show up for every day and every minute of the proceedings? He has the constitutional right to do so. We want the jury to see him. We have the belief in our system that when you put witnesses up on the trial, they should be confronted by the defendant so we can tell who's lying and who's not. But President Trump, as you've said before, has to conduct a re-election campaign. Is he going to be there every day for the trial when he's supposed to be out of caucuses and primaries? That underscores, again, the unprecedented nature of this case. Last thing I just want to add is, even though this is the most important, I think, criminal trial we've had in our history, even though the stakes are so high, I would have liked the Justice Department to present a watertight case on the facts and on the law. And in fact, I think what you're going to see in this courtroom and what Donald Trump's going to see as the defendant is a prosecution that's got to really press imaginative, unprecedented theories about the crimes and has to fill some holes in the facts, since they could never make the direct connection between Donald Trump and the January 6 rioters. One other thing about the placement of the courtroom in the courthouse is that the January 6 rioters, on their way from the White House and the Ellipse to the Capitol that day, would have marched right in front of that courthouse. I would have had an office. I used to look right out on the path that they were taking that day.
So, by the way, you were referring to this case today, not the prior cases, that when you said about a tighter or more buttoned-up case, this case today, right?
Yes, yes.
Got it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.